forget to do that. So I'm starting the recording now, and everybody missed out on my introduction, but they'll get to hear the important part.
They'll get to hear my voice first. That's great.
All right, so I'm gonna just real quickly just reframe the question, repose the question so it's part of the recording. So again, sorry. Again, how has the COVID-19 pandemic fundamentally changed the outlook on learning analytics for both suppliers and institutions? Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, sure. So yeah, it just representing the some of the supplier space right now. Hi, Rachel Scherer. I'd say a couple of things. I mean, you know, this is a little bit of a tricky question because I would say in a lot of ways, a lot of us on the supplier side would say that learning analytics actually hasn't changed a whole lot in terms of how we think about it, how it can be applied, that kind of thing. I do think that something that a lot of us are seeing is that there's a lot more urgency, of course. You know, there are a lot of people who have adopted tools in a very short period of time. And, you know, we are in the position of not only providing many of those tools, but also helping people make sense of, you know, basic questions about those tools. How are they being used? Who's using them? Is the use of those tools efficacious in any way toward outcomes that are important to our learners or to us at the institution level or things like that? I would say that learning analytics as a body of work in some ways also perhaps has become more relevant. The more, you know, the more gravity kind of moves toward technology mediated interactions. Obviously, the more value then that places into the realm of the data exhaust that comes out of those interactions, and then the type of analysis or support that can be provided in support of teaching and learning. The other thing I would just maybe say in this rapid reaction is that there have also emerged, I would say, to a much greater level of prominence at this point than we have seen previously, concerns about privacy, concerns about appropriate data governance. So where exactly and in what way and with what controls are my data being hosted? There are questions which I think are appropriate and fantastic about making sure that the actual methodologies that we apply when we think about learning analytics are driving us in the right direction. So toward a picture that is more equitable and supportive of taking learners from where they are today and bringing them to where they need to be, as opposed to sort of entrenching them in a place that they might be already. So it's kind of my quick reaction. Not a lot of changes, but I would say new emphasis on a lot of existing themes.
And I would agree with everything Rachel said, particularly the topic around urgency and around a focus on equity. I think again, looking at the institutional side, what I've seen a lot more of is two things. So one, using data to help students in ways that faculty would have done normally if they were interacting with the students face-to-face regularly. So understanding which students need support, what type of support they might need, those types of things. Being able to connect to the students either by faculty or by advisor, or also just connecting those students to resources that they might need. And then the other thing I've seen at quite a few institutions that I have worked with is really contributing to a sense of community and a sense of belonging among students when they are not on campus as much. So a lot of the focus around student retention is really focused on those types of interactions. So I think all of that, and then again, like Rachel said, really focusing on how we can consume more of the data that's emitted from all these tools we use, but how do we do it in a way that promotes equity and is efficient and very quick.
Just real quickly, I'd like to dig in slightly there. I mean, when you are talking about kind of the interactions between students, how are you looking at that?
So there are So it's not necessarily student to student interactions. It's more about student to faculty and making sure that the students have access to the resources that they need. So it's a more of a trying to understand where students might need additional support, where um, where data can tell us where students are struggling or where students aren't engaging the way that they had in the past. How can we proactively reach out to those students and help them connect to those resources, or better understand why their need for those resources has changed from one year over the next.
And is that typically prompted by, for example, the faculty members, where they're saying we're not hearing from this
That
subset of,
That's correct. So it's usually faculty members, TAs, and then in some cases advisors as well. So if a student is going to see advisors and they raise some issues, that's also another vector. And at UC San Diego, we've built what we call the Student Activity Hub, which brings in SIS data, LMS data, advising data, and a few other tool data that help us have a complete picture of the student. And we're still learning exactly how we want to apply those data to help students.
okay, and Rachel, is there anything else you'd like to add before we get on to the next question? All right. So building off of that a little bit, what trends do you anticipate will continue that came out of this?
So I think one of, and again, Rachel mentioned this earlier, is one of the things that came out of this is the sense of urgency and a more critical, holistic view at the use of data and analytics in the classroom. So I think one of the trends that I expect to see in the future is better and more robust policies and governance statements around how these data are being used, who has access to them, what they can and can't be used for. So I think the fact that these conversations happened and a lot of people took a lot of proactive action to bring these types of solutions to their campuses, I think started a lot of really good conversations that I think will continue into the future. I'll let Rachel go.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the thing I'd add to that is sort of maybe a little bit of a technology complement to the governance side of things. I think, we do have a new moment for learning analytics now, and I think that what that new moment also kind of affords us is the opportunity to think about how we want to actually use it as a tool, rather than sort of relegated to this maybe big brothery surveillance-y type of space that I think it's maybe for some, kind of been perceived as in the past. So when I think about what that tangibly looks like in the future, I think, maybe less in terms of data silos, data people, that the data person at your institution who is pulling data, right? All this kind of really entrenched language around data or analytics as a siloed thing unto itself. And I think more in terms of information being democratized to different stakeholders at an institution or across a set of institutions as appropriate. I think about, the learner actually, having a full and complete accounting of the information that is relevant to their journey, and perhaps that the information that others are using to make decisions based, that might affect that journey. And I think what, supports some of those mechanisms, do then kind of interact directly with the policy space, Amin, that you're talking about. So thinking about access of information, transparency, and all of the mechanisms that support those concepts.
Do you think, Rachel and Amin, that you made note of sort of lowering this kind of veil that exists around learning analytics, if I could sort of paraphrase a little bit, and kind of making it less of the big boogeyman, big brother that's kind of watching over you and recording what you do and kind of wagging a finger at you? Do you think that there is, what do you think is the biggest barrier to making it so that people understand that the data, what the data is, why it's being used, and how it can help them? Like, how do we get that barrier lowered, I guess?
Well, I mean, I would say part of it might just be getting our language right. I mean, because actually, even as we're having this conversation, candidly, a little bit, you know, I'm conscious that the term learning analytics, I think, maybe has a couple different meanings to a couple different audiences. You know, I think that it can feel, you know, surveillancy or any other kind of negative loaded language that you might want to use, you know, because I think, you know, there's a realm where it's sort of occupied like a researchy realm, which is by its nature, you know, a couple steps removed from the actual person. And I think that what that has done is that has naturally created a little bit of a barrier where, you know, the average human maybe doesn't exactly know what is meant by learning analytics or what it's actually doing for them or how it can be supportive of the experience. So I do think that there could be just a little bit of, you know, kind of continued socialization of the work that's been done, the intention of that work, and so on. I also just think that familiarity will help. So once people start to see tangible things, right, that are again supportive of them and of their experience, as opposed to, you know, somebody coming from on high and wagging a finger, as you kind of said, Joshua, that will naturally start to break down some of these walls. So I could think about, you know, a manifestation that is a nudge in a learning experience, just given kind of where my head is and where I could come from. But I could also think of other kinds of manifestations that would help create that familiarity.
Okay, let's move on to the next one here. So here's the next question. The next question is, has the interest or focus changed in response to the pandemic, or have the questions that need answering changed? Sorry for the typo there.
So I think the way it has changed, it's accelerated a lot of interest in developing some of the capacities that you need in order to, like Rachel was saying, both on the technology side and then actually on the application side. So I think this has been a really exciting time for a lot of people. I think a lot of people were in the starting blocks on learning analytics for a while, and they were looking around at people doing things, and they weren't quite sure how to jump in. And this has again accelerated a lot of people's interest and a lot of focus and attention on finding additional ways to be able to support student success. One of the institutions I get to work with is UC Merced, and at UC Merced, they have also implemented the Student Activity Hub to bring together these data, but really it's reprioritized things both organizationally and functionally in terms of student and faculty support on their campus. So for them, it was bringing together all these disparate groups that were looking at this problem, applying all of those really smart people to solving this problem, and then thinking about what that actually means for change on their campus. So I think that has been, and it kind of dovetails with your previous question, Joshua, but I think that's really been what I've seen happen, is there's been a lot more interest and a lot more urgency, like Rachel said at the very beginning, around a lot of these things.
Yeah, and I guess what I'd add is, you know, I would definitely not characterize the interest as a having changed. I would say focused, definitely. I would say sort of experiencing some evolution, definitely. Like, you know, just from the provider perspective, we definitely have seen a pattern of questions that kind of roughly align to the March time period, right? About basically getting online. You know, what does it look like to get online? Are people accessing the tools that we have either implemented or adopted? If they are accessing those tools, when, you know, kind of a lot of really immediate order questions about kind of all of us getting an understanding of the kind of new, again, tech-mediated world that a lot of folks were living in. We've seen some of those really basic kind of adoption utilization type questions kind of naturally flow into questions about, efficacy. I would say mostly in the context of, mostly in an immediate context, right? In the context of a course, in the context maybe of a single piece of content or a tool that has been adopted by the institution. We expect, and we're starting to see some of those efficacy questions even flow a little bit further, up level a little bit further, looking at the grain of, the program, the institution, so like now that we all have a chance to breathe is the sense I get. We can kind of stop, take a look around and think about what we can be doing better to kind of optimize the new environment, the new experience that we've created. I do think that the, maybe not last step, but sort of another step beyond this is going to be that, institutions kind of broadly start to be able to turn, what I always kind of call exhaust, right, of the experience that they've created back on itself, right? So use the data to create sort of a faithful picture of what's going on in their ecosystem, which they can then use as a jumping off point for experimentation or continuous improvement or things like that. So I do think that we're seeing kind of a natural set of evolution of focused questions as a result of this kind of global event that we're all going through right now.
And I think so the institutions I work with that already were working on learning analytics before the pandemic world. One of the things I've seen, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but they've gotten a lot greedier about what they want. They realize that once and Rachel probably has more diverse experience and probably talk to this even further, but in my experience, when institutions or when users start seeing, oh, I can use these data to be able to answer these types of questions, they instinctively just start thinking of more complex questions, which requires more complex data manipulation and data handling, and sometimes just larger data sets. So I think that's also been really exciting at some of the institutions that I've, like UC San Diego, that I've been able to work at. They're pushing what they have been doing with learning analytics because there's more demand and there's more focus on it.
Just taking a quick step back, I heard a theme I heard there was that for schools or institutions who had already been involved in some level of learning analytic, that there's now a push towards being more thoughtful in the types of metrics, or greedy, as you put it, Amin, in what they're looking to get. I was wondering if the two of you might just take a moment and talk about the experiences that you've had with organizations that had not been previously involved in having a learning analytics strategy, and what types of questions they're asking, and whether or not you've seen them evolve quickly, more quickly than maybe organizations who were sort of in it already had originally.
I can go first. I mean, I would say that I think the reality is that the majority of institutions, at least that we deal with, right, as a provider of technology, did and continue to have some form of data analytics strategy and education technology strategy. I'd actually be hard pressed to think of an example of somebody who didn't. I absolutely think that a lot of institutions had strategies that are started from different levels of maturity that I based entirely on some of their drivers kind of pre and post pandemic. I do think that globally those institutions who had a maybe less mature data strategy have again kind of raised in prominence some of those maybe more advanced types of questions. So I'd kind of reference my earlier comment about suddenly paying a little bit more attention to existing information about privacy, transparency, any of security, any of the sort of supporting infrastructure around data that is being provided to them by providers. And I think that I would say that's been the major type of shift I've seen, maybe more so than like individual institutions getting necessarily a ton more complex in their questions in a short period of time.
I would agree with Rachel on all of that.
Okay, so we are coming up on the top of the hour, which is our scheduled end time. There was one question in the chat, so I think we can get to this one pretty quickly. So I'll put that one out there. From Christopher Kelly, how much are institutions relying on the vendors for assistance with key analytic info?
So I think that actually answers the final question we were going to answer.
It's almost like I look.
Yeah, Christopher set us up perfectly. So having a strong vendor has been invaluable in having a strong vendor who supports open standards has been invaluable in accelerating some of these analytics projects at the institutions. I think the other thing that standards have really been able to do are to have locally an increasingly complex analytics framework without increasing the cost too much. So I think vendors who are able to support not a standard, but a common learning record store, for example, it really just accelerates everything. And I think that's where the vendor institution partnership, in my opinion, has been really great over these last 8 months or whatever it's been. It's having the vendor come in, be a good partner, and making sure the data is accessible. And then, like Jenna mentioned in the chat as well, there are going to be additional questions that need to be answered that then the institution can work directly with the people asking those questions, but the data comes from the vendors themselves.
Yeah, and you know, I think what looking like a good vendor in this situation is just kind of like taking a really big step back and thinking about what people are actually asking for, which is kind of, you know, I've created this experience, you know, I've got a whole bunch of learners and I've got, you know, staff and I've got teaching staff who are all kind of participating in this experience. And what I'm asking is, you know, kind of break this down for me, right? Like give me, I want sort of a complete and holistic kind of understanding of what's going on behind the scenes in that experience that I've created. So, you know, I think when I think about sort of the close to technical infrastructure words that would be supportive of that from a partner, I would think about things like data flow. I would think about things like data democratization, and I would think about sort of a strong data governance strategy that permits and supports participation from, you know, what any given vendor partner of yours would call a third party, right? Depending on who they are. All of those things I would say are definitely supported by a standards-led approach to your overall data strategy, and I do think that vendors are paying attention to that, and we will see sort of a renewed drive on the part of providers to kind of continue to try to be supportive of that, you know, what's the big picture type of question that we need to be able to answer.
Okay, well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank Rachel and Amin for their time, and hopefully this helped to not only answer some questions, but raise new questions, because as Jenna put in the chat, the outcome of good research isn't an answer, it's probably more questions. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day, and please attend more of the IMS quarterly sessions. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.